The sun dipped lazily over the serene skyline of Lekki Phase 1, casting long golden shadows over manicured lawns and marble-tiled mansions. Behind a tall black gate trimmed with gold initials stood the Adebayo residence, an architectural gem with crystal chandeliers, imported Italian furniture, and a fountain that danced to soft jazz in the evenings. Inside, 10-year-old Mark Adebayo stepped off the Royal Fountain International School bus, his polished school shoes clicking softly on the granite driveway. The uniformed security man, Colonel, greeted him with a half-smile as he swung the gate open. Mark responded with a quiet nod, his leather backpack slightly slipping off one shoulder. The mansion was majestic, but silent. "Welcome, young master," the stewardess called from the kitchen as he entered. Mark gave a weak smile and walked into the living room, an expansive space that smelled of lavender diffusers and untouched elegance. His mother and father, Chief and Mrs. Adebayo, were high-profile owners of Jade Royale Couture, a luxury fashion empire that catered to Lagos elites and celebrities. The house reflected their taste for grandeur, but not the rhythm of a family. Mark dropped his bag by the stairs and sank into the plush couch. The silence around him felt heavy, different from the playful noise at school or the chatter of kids on the bus. Here, the only sound was the distant hum of the air conditioning and the slow ticking of the Swarovski wall clock. Most days followed this pattern. The school bus dropped him off by 3 p.m., and his parents wouldn't return until past 6:30. Between that time, the world stood still for Mark. No laughter, no warmth, just the soft glow of chandeliers and the emptiness of polished rooms. He stared at the untouched TV remote on the coffee table, then reached for a storybook from his backpack. But even the pages felt dry today. A whisper of sadness curled in his chest. He didn't need more toys. He didn't need another iPad or a trip to ShopRite. What Mark longed for was someone who would listen, someone who would be there, someone who would make this house feel like home. That same night, as Mark sat at the edge of the dinner table pushing golden jollof rice around his plate, he finally found the courage to speak. "Mummy, I don't like being home alone after school." Mrs. Adebayo, dressed in a silk Ankara wrap gown and pearls that glimmered like moonlight, looked up from her tablet. Her brows knit with concern. "Why, darling?" Mark shrugged. "It's too quiet, and I just don't like it." Chief Adebayo looked up from his glass of fresh tiger nut milk, his gold wristwatch gleaming. "You know we're only working hard to give you the best, son." "I know, Daddy," Mark replied softly. "I just miss you sometimes." For a moment, the grandeur of the dining room dimmed beneath his small voice. Then Mrs. Adebayo reached across the table and held his hand. "You've been so patient with us, Mark. Thank you." The next morning, before school, she sat him down and said, "I've spoken with someone I trust very much. Her name is Benita, Miss Benny. She's going to keep you company after school until I get home. She already works with me, and she lives in the guest quarters." Mark remembered her vaguely. Benita, the tall, elegant woman with soft eyes and a laugh like a chime. She always helped organize fittings during fashion shoots and greeted Mark with, "How's my handsome prince today?" When he got home that day, she was waiting at the door. "Hey, champ," she said, her lips painted a soft pink. "Ready to hang out?" Mark blinked. "Okay." Her quarters were part of the estate, a cozy two-bedroom flat tucked behind the main house with a jasmine-scented balcony and crisp, white curtains. Inside, she offered him a chilled malt drink and a steaming plate of fried plantains with scrambled eggs. "So, tell me everything about school," she said, settling beside him on the settee. Mark hesitated, but her smile felt warm, and the room felt less lonely. That afternoon, for the first time in weeks, the mansion didn't feel so empty. Over the following weeks, Benita Odebor, or Miss Benny as Mark now called her, became a daily fixture in his life. The once lonely afternoons transformed into sessions filled with cartoons, puzzles, and gisting over bowls of indomie and suya. Her laughter echoed through her flat like a lullaby, and her perfume, something flowery and expensive, soon became a comforting scent to Mark. She always made time for him. While his parents' voices often drifted through phone calls and business meetings, Miss Benny's presence felt immediate. She asked questions, laughed at his jokes, and listened intently when he spoke. It was refreshing new. One rainy Tuesday, as thunder rolled over the Lagos skyline, Miss Benny handed Mark a package wrapped in shiny gold paper. "What's this?" Mark asked, eyes wide. "Open it," she said, grinning. Inside was a brand new football, imported, glossy, with a crest of the Super Eagles etched on the side. "For me," he gasped. "Of course," she said, tousling his hair. "You're like the little brother I never had." Mark was elated. No one outside his family had ever given him such a personal gift before. "Thank you, Miss Benny." She smiled and patted the seat beside her. "Come, let's watch cartoons and eat popcorn." The bond between them grew stronger by the day. Mark began looking forward to school closing time, knowing he'd be greeted with something warm, a new joke, a surprise treat, a shoulder rub when he was tired. But slowly, the tone of their time together began to shift. One afternoon, after helping him with homework, she sat a little too close. Her questions became oddly personal. "Do you like it here with me more than with Mummy and Daddy?" she asked one day, eyes searching. Mark blinked. "I don't know. I like being with you both." She smiled, but it lingered too long. Then came the moment he would never forget, the first time she said, "Let's play a new game. Just for us. You mustn't tell anyone. Promise?" Mark tilted his head, confused. "What kind of game?" She smiled again. "Just trust me, little prince. It'll be fun." Though he didn't understand it yet, Mark had unknowingly stepped into a trap. It started subtly. Miss Benny dimmed the lights in the living room, drew the curtains, and switched off the TV. "No distractions," she said sweetly, patting the space beside her on the couch. "This one is a secret game. Only special friends get to play it." Mark sat, his football resting by his feet, unsure but trusting. "Close your eyes," she whispered. "Now, don't open them until I say so." At first, it felt like hide and seek or one of those pretend spy games from school. But then came the silence, and then the strange way she touched his arm. Her voice stayed soft, coaxing, playful, but her hands didn't feel like a game. Mark's brows furrowed. "I don't like this," he mumbled, pulling away slightly. Miss Benny only laughed. "Sure, you'll understand soon, baby boy. Don't be shy." Something in Mark twisted, a knot deep in his belly. This wasn't fun. It wasn't football or cartoons or story time. It was something else. And though he didn't have the words for it, every instinct inside him screamed, "This is wrong." "I don't want to play," he said quietly, his voice shaking. But she just patted his head. "You'll get used to it. Promise me you won't tell anyone, okay? It's our secret." That night, Mark lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, the once exciting football now shoved into a corner. Sleep didn't come easily. And when it did, he woke up to something he hadn't experienced in years. His bed was wet. Cold. Embarrassing. Was it an accident? Maybe. He didn't know. But when it happened again 2 nights later, he stopped telling the house staff to clean it. He bundled the sheets himself. Hid the evidence. Swallowed his shame. Miss Benny continued to smile at him in the afternoons like nothing had changed. But something had, everything had. The house still looked beautiful. The air still smelled like wealth. But to Mark, the walls had begun to close in. And deep inside, a small voice whispered, "I need help." Days passed. Then weeks. Mark's world, the one that once revolved around football, cartoons, and his storybooks, began to darken. He no longer laughed during break time at Royal Fountain International School. He avoided eye contact. His energy, once vibrant, faded into the background like a forgotten painting on a wall. Teachers began to notice, but none pressed too hard, until Mrs. Okonkwo, his class teacher, started paying closer attention. Mark had always been her star pupil, quick to answer questions, always eager to write the most imaginative essays. But now he sat at the back, silent, often doodling aimlessly instead of completing classwork. His once neatly combed hair began to look unkempt. His uniform sometimes wrinkled. His eyes carried a weight too heavy for any 10-year-old. At home, the symptoms were louder. but unnoticed. He stopped asking for bedtime stories. He avoided eye contact with Miss Benny. His once-cherished football remained untouched in a corner, collecting dust. And almost every night, Mark quietly woke to a soaked mattress, slipping out of bed to try and clean it before anyone noticed. But the worst wasn't the nightmares or the accidents. It was the silence. A heavy, choking silence that wrapped itself around him like a cold blanket. He didn't know how to talk about it. How could he? She had told him not to tell. And even if he wanted to, what words could explain how the warmest smile he'd ever known had become the scariest part of his day? One Saturday morning, while his parents discussed an upcoming fashion gala over breakfast, Mark sat curled in a corner of the living room, watching the way they laughed and planned and shared ideas like nothing was wrong. He wanted to scream,
To yell. To tell them everything.
but nothing came out. So he kept quiet, and inside that silence, the whispers of fear grew louder. Monday morning arrived with the usual hum of luxury cars pulling into the gates of Royal Fountain International School. Mark stepped out of the family's sleek black Range Rover, his backpack feeling heavier than it should. His footsteps dragged across the marble-finished corridors, echoing a silence only he could hear. Mrs. Okonkwo was already writing on the whiteboard when he entered. She smiled at him, warm, steady. "Good morning, Mark." He mumbled something that sounded like a reply and slid into his seat at the back. As the class began their creative writing assignment, she paced gently between the rows, reading over shoulders and offering gentle encouragement. But when she reached Mark's desk, she paused. His page was blank, no characters, no adventure, not even a title. "Mark," she said softly, crouching beside him. "You usually love this topic. What's going on, sweetheart?" He didn't respond. His hand clenched the pencil tight. His eyes refused to meet hers. She didn't push. Instead, after class, she asked him to wait. Once the other students had gone, she sat beside him again, this time with no whiteboard, no lesson plan, just silence and a cup of Milo from the staff kitchen. "You know you can talk to me about anything," she said. "Even if it's hard. Even if it's scary." Mark looked at her, unsure. His lips trembled. His eyes welled up, but he blinked fast to stop the tears. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to carry it alone." Something broke inside him. A dam, maybe. After a long pause, he whispered, barely audible, "It's Miss Benny. She makes me feel uncomfortable." Mrs. Okonkwo's expression didn't change. No shock. No panic. Just calm concern. "Thank you for telling me, Mark," she said, her voice firm and kind. "That was very brave. This is not your fault. And I promise, we're going to help you." For the first time in weeks, Mark felt something lift. It wasn't joy, not yet. But it was the beginning of something different. It was hope. Mrs. Okonkwo moved swiftly but with care. That same afternoon, she filed a confidential report with the school's child welfare officer, detailing Mark's disclosure. Within hours, the school principal and a certified child psychologist were informed, and a formal call was placed to Mark's parents, requesting an urgent meeting. When Chief and Mrs. Adebayo arrived in their matching Oso-oak outfits, fresh from a fashion meeting in Victoria Island, they had no idea their carefully constructed world was about to be shaken. Inside the private conference room, the principal's face was grave. "Your son made a disclosure today," he began. "It's serious." He told his teacher that Miss Benita has been engaging in behavior that makes him deeply uncomfortable. Silence. Mrs. Adebayo blinked rapidly. "Benita?" Her voice cracked. "That can't be. She's lived with us for over 2 years. She's practically family." Chief Adebayo clenched his fists. What exactly did Mark say? The counselor gently stepped in. He didn't go into detail, but he was clear he feels unsafe. That's enough to take immediate protective action. Tears brimmed in Mrs. Adebayo's eyes. Why didn't we see it? Why didn't we listen when he said he felt alone? The school officials assured them that Mark would be supported and that further steps were being taken with the Lagos Child Protection Unit. That evening, Officer Chioma, a calm, sharp-eyed woman in a navy blue blouse, arrived at the Adebayo home. She spoke with Mark gently in the presence of a child therapist. "You did something very important," she said. "You told someone." That's how heroes start. Mark didn't say much. He just nodded. For once, the silence inside him didn't feel like fear. It felt like release. Later that night, as Chief Adebayo sat in Mark's room holding his son's small hand, he whispered, "I'm so sorry, my boy. We should have been there. We will never leave you feeling alone again." The next morning, Miss Benita Odebor was arrested quietly. The staff watched from a distance as she was escorted out. Her polished heels clicked against the marble as always, but the mask of elegance had cracked, and the truth behind her smile had finally been unmasked. News of Miss Benita's arrest spread through the gated streets of Lekki Phase 1 like Harmattan wildfire. Whispers trailed her polished reputation. She always looked so gentle. Benita? No, now, she was too classy for that. This world, you can't trust appearances anymore. Behind the gossip and shock, real work began. At the Lagos State Child Protection Unit, Officer Chioma filed an official report, ensuring that the evidence, Mark's statement, and testimonies from the school were handled discreetly but decisively. Benita was held without bail pending investigation. Meanwhile, the Adebayos took drastic action. Mrs. Adebayo fired the entire domestic staff team, not out of anger, but regret. "I don't want anyone around my son who didn't notice," she told her husband. She personally supervised the installation of CCTV cameras around the house and ordered the guest quarters to be sealed indefinitely. Most importantly, Mark was enrolled in weekly therapy sessions at a top child psychological center in Victoria Island. His therapist, Dr. S.A. Ojo, was warm, intuitive, and experienced in working with children who struggled to express pain. At first, Mark barely spoke. He sat on the fuzzy blue couch and traced the edges of the rug with his toes. But over time, in that safe space filled with soft tones and steady patience, the pieces of his story began to come out, slowly, sometimes in tears, sometimes in drawings, sometimes in just a nod or a sigh. At school, Mrs. Okonkwo continued to be his silent shield. She adjusted lesson plans for his comfort, watched over his interactions, and quietly communicated with the counselor for regular updates. But perhaps the most moving transformation came from his parents. Chief Adebayo began working from home 3 days a week. He drove Mark to school himself. Mrs. Adebayo shut down her flagship boutique for a month and took over bedtime duties personally, reading him stories, holding him when the nightmares came, and reminding him daily, "You are safe now." Through the lace of Benita's carefully constructed charm, and beneath the uniform of authority worn by Officer Chioma, justice had found its way, quietly but firmly. For Mark, the journey was still unfolding. But the darkness that once haunted him had finally begun to lose its grip. The mansion in Lekki Phase 1 hadn't changed much on the outside, still as regal, still as pristine. But inside, something had shifted. The air felt different, warmer, almost like the home had exhaled years of tension it didn't know it carried. For the first time in years, the Adebayo household slowed down. No more late-night fittings, no urgent deliveries, no house staff buzzing through the halls like machines. Instead, the family found new rhythms: breakfast together, evening walks around the estate, laughter over dinner not interrupted by phone calls or business meetings. Chief Adebayo learned to braid Mark's hair for school, clumsily but with pride. He even started reading the Super Strikers comic book series just to keep up with Mark's interests. "I'm more of a Financial Times man," he would joke, "but for you, I'll read anything." Mrs. Adebayo transformed the once-ignored sunroom into a cozy reading and bonding corner. She called it Mark's nest. Each evening, she'd wrap her son in a soft Ankara blanket and read stories, not about princes or heroes, but about boys who spoke up and found healing. In therapy, Mark was learning to use his voice again, not just to tell his truth, but to reclaim his joy. He wrote short stories that made Dr. S.A. laugh and brought her to tears. Stories about a brave lion cub who survived a storm in the savannah, about a footballer who dribbled past fear, about a boy who found strength in silence. At school, his classmates noticed the spark returning. He started raising his hand again, smiling at recess, scoring goals on the pitch. The light that had dimmed behind his eyes was flickering back, stronger this time, steadier.
Even his bed stayed dry now.
One afternoon, as he and his parents sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the Lagos skyline, Mark turned to his mother. "Are you happy now?" he asked. Mrs. Adebayo looked at him, tears in her eyes. "I am. Because you are." Love, in the Adebayo home, had been rewritten, not in the grand gestures of wealth, but in the small, daily acts of presence, in hugs that lingered, in bedtime stories, in 3 simple words whispered with sincerity. "I'm here, Mark." It was Children's Expression Day at Royal Fountain International School, a special event where students shared stories, poems, or songs about their experiences, feelings, and dreams. For most pupils, it was a day to perform skits or sing with friends. But for Mark Adebayo, it was something more, a moment he had been quietly preparing for with his therapist and teacher. He stood backstage in his clean white shirt and navy trousers, his speech folded neatly in his hand. The hall was filled with proud parents, classmates, and dignitaries. His parents sat in the front row, holding hands, something they hadn't done publicly in years. Up next, we have Mark Adebayo sharing a story titled, "The Boy Who Found His Voice." The room quieted as Mark walked slowly onto the stage, his small footsteps echoing in the microphone. He took a deep breath and looked into the crowd. He could see Mrs. Okonkwo giving him a slight, encouraging nod. He could see Dr. Esse in the back row, smiling with quiet pride. And right in front of him, his mother and father, their eyes locked on his. He began to read. There was once a boy who lived in a golden house, but felt very small inside. People thought he had everything, but what he needed most was someone to notice when he was sad. The room was silent. Not a cough. Not a whisper. As he spoke, his voice grew steadier, firmer. He didn't give names. He didn't share the darkest details. He didn't need to. But in every word, there was truth. And in every line, there was power. He thought no one would believe him. But then someone listened, and everything started to change. He learned that telling the truth doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger than fear. When he finished, the audience erupted in applause. Not the polite kind. The real kind, raw, emotional, and unfiltered. Mrs. Adebayo stood with tears streaking down her cheeks. Chief Adebayo placed a hand over his heart. After the event, classmates surrounded Mark. Some just said, "Well done." Others asked to read his story. One even whispered, "You're brave, Mark." He smiled, not the nervous kind. A real smile, one that reached his eyes. Later that evening, as the golden lights of Lekki twinkled under the dusky sky, Mark sat in Mark's nest, scribbling in his journal. He looked up at his mother and said, "Mummy, I think I want to write a book one day." She kissed his forehead. "And I'll be the first to buy it." Because in a city of golden gates and hidden truths, a boy once silenced had found the greatest treasure of all.
His voice.